Welcome back to the channel, everyone. In this episode, we're going to tell you about the top 3 mistakes when working with epoxy resin. Stay tuned. One of the worst things that can happen to any maker using epoxy resin is a leak. Leaks can be absolutely disastrous. All the money that you spend on epoxy resin just leaked out of your form and onto the floor or onto the surface that you're using. So that's why we encourage you folks, always take the time to use the proper tools and the proper methods for sealing your forms. We like to make sure that our forms and our seals areas, our joints, are nice and tight. We use some top-notch screws. We use Craig brand. You can use any one as long as they're a good coarse thread and you're making sure that those are snug and tight and sealed in good. It's also crucial that you make sure that you use, whether it's silicone, gasket seal, whatever it is that you're using, caulking to apply to the joints, that they are thoroughly spread out and that you don't have any tiny little cracks in the silicone or anything where the epoxy can leak through. Because epoxy, especially if you're pouring deep pour, it's super watery. And like water, whenever it's sitting, it will find an area to go. So if you have a tiny little crack in there that wasn't sealed properly, guess what? You're going to get a leak. And to stop leaks once it's happened is an absolute nightmare. So we just want to emphasize, folks, always take the extra steps to make sure that every single seam on your form is thoroughly covered with whatever material that you're using to seal it, and also make sure that it's completely dry and it's ready to use. It may take just a little bit more time, but in the end, it's well worth it. Take it from us. Leaks are no fun. They're a waste of your time, and they can totally be avoided. Mistake number 2 is not measuring your resin correctly. You can always get a correct measurement if you go to our website at upstartepoxy.com and check out our resin calculator. It gives you the specs for entering in however many inches that you're going to pour, whether it be by length, by width, and by height, depth. It's absolutely crucial to get these measurements right, folks. Remember, if you're using deep pour, it's always a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning that 2 parts of the epoxy resin versus 1 part of the hardener. If you pour too much hardener, you'll end up with a tacky, sticky result that'll never fully harden. And if you pour too little hardener, you'll end up usually with a rubber-like material that will not be hardened at all. So it's really crucial, folks, that you get these measurements right and that you make sure that they're blending in perfectly. And remember, tabletop is always a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that equal amounts of each part are poured. Again, if you pour too much of one part or too little of the other part, you're going to end up with a mess and an unworkable material. And nobody wants that, because you want to create beautiful stuff, not messes or mistakes, folks. And mistake number 3 is overheating your piece when doing a flood coat. Flood coats are generally done with tabletop epoxy 1-to-1 ratio. But the thing with a tabletop epoxy is that it cures a lot faster than, say, deep pour. The agents in tabletop epoxy allow for it usually to pour up to 1/8 of an inch up to 1/4 of an inch. So anytime that you pour more tabletop like that, it's going to heat up super fast. So if it's getting hot already and you keep hitting it with the heat gun or your torch, you're going to make that epoxy cure a lot faster, and you're going to have an area that's already cured and the rest of it hasn't even cured, and it's going to look like crap. You don't want to do that, folks. It's imperative that you always keep your torch or your heat gun moving. You never keep it in one area for more than 1 or 2 seconds at the most. Always keep that heat evenly distributed, folks. So always make sure that you have every last bubble taken out. But if you're having some stubborn bubbles, don't keep the heat on it for too long, folks. I hope these topics have helped you today, and I hope you've been able to learn something from this. Again, this is Steve with Upstart Epoxy, and we'll see you next time.